I remember calling my parents after a while, and they became almost the measure of how much grief was in my life, because I would tell them about the next friend who was sick or the next friend who was dying, and it was so interesting because unlike my friends even, they were the ones who would say to me, this isn't supposed to be happening to someone your age.
Living in New York at that time was like crazy because people are getting sick every day. 3, 4, 5, 6 people that you hear about being sick.
Here I was trying to deal with having the virus, trying to figure out how to keep myself healthy, and then all of a sudden all of my friends who were my support started getting sick and then started to die.
There was no information. I think it was shrouded. The information was shrouded. I think on a powerful level, in terms of the powers that be, it was happening to a convenient population or convenient populations. It was gay people who were just getting what they deserved. It was, junkies.
How deeply are Americans worried about AIDS? A Los Angeles Times poll found that 50% of Americans favor quarantine for AIDS victims. 48% said they should be issued special identification. 15% said AIDS victims should be tattooed.
We were very scared of that the Reagan administration was going to put people with AIDS in internment camps. And I think that we came close to that in this country.
I immediately figured out that this was the Vietnam War all over again. It was about people in power not caring about the lives of people who didn't have power and being willing to accept a system of attrition where people would die.
I read in The Native that Larry Kramer was going to replace Nora Ephron, who was scheduled to speak at the center, but had canceled, and Larry was the replacement.
Kramer delivered a fiery speech, and I remember he asked like half of the audience to stand up, and he said, "You're all going to be dead in 6 months. Now what are we going to do about it?"
Larry gave the spark with his speech, absolutely. No question like that, but the fuel that was ready to explode was already there.
Coalition to Unleash Power. We are a diverse, nonpartisan group of individuals united in anger and committed to direct action to end the AIDS crisis.
Wall Street, don't you know the profit motive has got to go? Wall Street, don't you know the profit motive has got to go? More AIDS drugs is what we need. What we have is profit and greed.
Act up, fight back, fight AIDS. Act up, fight back, fight AIDS. Act up, fight back, fight AIDS. Act up.
My name is Mark Platopoulos, and I'm working with ACT UP. We're here to protest the mismanagement of the government-designated AIDS treatment evaluation units.
Those first few years, people were so busy digesting what was happening to them that politics only came up after 5 or 6 years of being knee-deep in a crisis. You know, the very first things we had to do was to try take care of the people who were sick and try and make sense of it for oneself.
I went to ACT UP actually primarily, I think, as an outlet for my anger and my rage. My boyfriend died of AIDS, and I was really, really upset that I couldn't do anything to help save his life.
I was actually walking to work on Wall Street that morning and got handed the flyer. So I went to the very next meeting and didn't miss a meeting after that.
I was hanging around the center on a Monday, and there was a lot of noise coming from room 101. Because I saw so many people there, I knew, something really big was going on. So, okay, I'll come in here for a few minutes just to see what's going on.
My brother died, and after the wake, I went over and sat in an ACT UP meeting. I didn't know where else to go, and I wanted to just go and feel that energy, that ACT UP energy. I can't explain it, but it made me feel better.
And when word got around that on Monday night, ACT UP gave a home to people who were sick, to people who were not yet sick, and to their friends and people who cared for them, it was not long before 100 to 200 people were meeting in that room every Monday night. Pretty soon it would be 400 and even more.
What the police will try to do is if there are people who are committed to non-cooperating, and I've done this, I've not given my name, I've not walked, I've not been fingerprinted, etc., and the police will try to use you as a weapon against the other people who have been arrested.
On the floor of ACT UP, there were people who had long histories of organizing. Even though the number of people with those kind of life experiences was small, the influence was great because a lot of the people who came into that room were blank slates politically.
This was my first impression. As someone who had been so politically active, there was not anybody in that room I knew. The other thing that struck me was that it was really great. I liked the idea that people got up and they said what they thought, and that people got up and they had an idea, and it seemed like if you had an idea, you could do it.
The plan, in case anyone doesn't know, is we're going to take over the Capitol by occupying it with our bodies.
The feeling of ACT UP in its heyday, when the room is packed and you can hardly get into the ground floor of the Gay Community Center, and there's business happening all over the place. There's all kinds of cruising going on the sides and eye-catching, and there was like an energy in the group that was amazing, and all that came together.
You go into the room, it's a kind of crappy room with linoleum floor, green and black if I remember correctly, with white iron poles all through the room. The access of the room, instead of being stacked the long way, was used in the wide way, so there's a kind of wide open, maybe 10 seats deep, facing the front of the room.
It was like a religious experience, in a sense that it was so overwhelming, coming from not having people to talk to about, to a bunch of fire-up people really fighting for their life, literally. And I just went right in.
I mean, I got the feeling then, which is a rare feeling, that people felt that lives depended on them. It was not a sort of an interesting political point. It was real. And that came through in that room. It came through in that room. I mean, people were driven to do something.
Living with AIDS is like living through a war which is happening only for those people who happen to be in the trenches. Every time a shell explodes, you look around and you discover that you've lost more of your friends. But nobody else notices. It isn't happening to them.
Those early days, the message that was repeated over and over was drugs into bodies.
We wanted access to drugs, and we wanted a much quicker approval process, or we wanted stuff given to people before it was approved.
The whole process of the FDA, the drug testing process, took years. We don't have years. This disease was taking people in months.
FDA, don't delay! 52 will die today! Release the drugs! Release the drugs! Release the drugs! Release the drugs! Silence equals death! 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 Get to work! 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 Get to work!
My name is Vito Russo. I'm a writer from New York City, and I have AIDS, and I'm here today because I don't want to die. I know that there are 80 drugs that haven't been tested yet by the FDA. I want to know why it takes 5 to 10 years in this country to test drugs that you can test in Europe in a third of the time. We are simply asking the FDA to do it quicker.
We found out, at least within those few years, if you could identify an obvious problem, if you could get the media on board about it, if you could get 200 to 300 ACT UP people sitting in at a very particular target and making it very, very uncomfortable for the powers that were, you could affect very, very quick change.
Because I had been part of the mainstream media, I understood it, and I could explain it to activists and therefore help strategize how to take that knowledge and use it to our own ends. Because we had activists from all over the country for that action, we had found people from all over and designated them as media spokespeople. And the national press did show up to that action in quite large numbers. Mike, I think, Signorelli, turned to the press and said, over there are people from 20 different states, each holding a little placard saying where they're from, ready to be your local spokesperson on these issues.
That made the difference between the protests getting page 5 in the Arizona paper or the Dallas Morning News and being on the front page because there was a local person there.
We're here because this government has the resources to deal with the AIDS epidemic, and they won't do it unless we force them. So we're trying to force them to deal with the AIDS epidemic.
Tell me who you are and where you're from.
I'm David Stern. I'm a person with AIDS from San Francisco.
Do you think this has been a successful action? Do you think it'll have an impact on the FDA?
Yeah, and we appeal to everybody to make it have more of an impact by continuing these kind of actions. Because we have to keep the pressure up on the government. They won't deal with the AIDS epidemic properly unless we keep up the pressure.
One thing we found historically in the gay movement, and also in particular in the fight against AIDS, is when we're activists, when we really act up, we have a big impact and we get what we're demanding, and when we're silent, we don't. And I think this action and other actions like this will have a big impact in terms of releasing those drugs that people with AIDS need for their survival.
If you look up, you will see that there are hundreds of FDA employees at the windows watching what's going on. They are not doing business as usual. Commissioner Frank Young is in Geneva. He's skipped town rather than deal with this. The police are trying to arrest people and take them off to jail. We are interfering with that by blocking the buses from leaving. We will not let business as usual continue. We will interfere with it everywhere and anywhere we can.
The media was listening to us, and we were sculpting media events and also then shaping our own messages from these events. Seize Control of the FDA was a tape that Greg and I made that was around the FDA action.
The action was organized by a nationwide network of AIDS activists calling themselves Act Now, the AIDS Coalition to Network, Organize, and Win.
The experimental research that they regulate is about to become the healthcare system, and healthcare, as AIDS activists know, is a right.
We are the experts when we go there. I mean, we don't give them the power and say, you are the only authorities. We are now the experts also, and we can talk to them as equals.
For me, it was a life and death matter. I don't tolerate AZT, and that's the only drug that the FDA has approved for my condition. So it depends on them whether I'm going to be living in 5 years.
I will never be silent again. 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 I will never be silent again.
What the FDA did was shift the group away from a defensive posture to an offensive posture. When the FDA action enabled us to come up with a vision for the way that healthcare should be done in this country, the way that drugs should be researched and sold and made available. The idea was to cut through the bureaucratic red tape of the Food and Drug Administration, but more than that, that people with AIDS should be involved in every level of decision-making concerning research for a treatment and a cure for our disease.
The most successful piece of the action was that for the first time the country got to see a national AIDS civil rights movement.
It was a turning point because it was the front page of every major newspaper in the country. It was the lead story on all of the nightly newscasts. It was really the start of the national AIDS movement, was the FDA demonstration. And the relationship with the FDA was really transformed. It changed. Drug approval standards changed. The demonstration was a really important piece in forcing the agency to realize that they had to deal with us in a way that they weren't used to dealing with consumers.
ACT UP was one of the initial places where people actually decided to take the tools of communication in their own hands and begin to document their own history. We decided that we were going to control the images, that we were not going to just be represented by mainstream media and that kind of, very specific language that was used around people with AIDS who were always victims, who were not empowered.
We formed this collective, the Testing Limits Collective, which was formed to document early activism.
Release those drugs! Release those drugs! Release those drugs! Release those drugs!
We organized it like a Soviet-style collective. It was consensus-driven. We just had this idea that we could go out and be these revolutionary filmmakers of the people and just document the everyday.
We wanted it to be used as an activist tool to get people thinking and get people out there and get people angry.
We've got a desperate population here. This is the first time in history where the afflicted population is actually taking control of the epidemic.
We're tired of the ineffectiveness of the government. We want the government now to listen to us.
Our community has finally come up with a disease that will do one of two things. It will either kill us or it will politicize us.
We are at war. We are absolutely at war.
30 years from now, everybody's going to ask, what did you do in the war? What did you do in the war?
We didn't want to have the voiceover telling you this is what is happening, this is the truth, this is the story. We wanted to say, there it is, you tell us what it means to you.
As long as I can physically function and physically fight, that's what I'm going to do. And I may not be able to fight the virus, I may not be able to fight the disease, but I can fight the system.
I hope by me doing what I'm doing, by coming out, encourages other women to make yourself visible and letting them feel comfortable in saying that it's okay to have AIDS.
When we talked about doing Diva TV, it was partly because we felt that the cameras were really an extension of ourselves. You know, I mean, I remember all the Diva people really just like having our cameras in our backpacks all the time. The way people carry a laptop now, we just had our cameras.
Television. We're a new activity group, and there's a lot of us around, as you can see. And tomorrow we're going to be, among other things, we're going to be doing police surveillance. We're going to make sure that police can
Where's your badge? Where's your badge? Where's your badge? That's too tight! That's too tight! Where's your badge? Where's your badge? Shut up! Where's your badge? Where's your badge? Too tight! Calm down, calm down. It hurts! Too tight!
We made a lot of VHS copies, and people were sending them back home just to give a sense. It was sort of this, it was like newsreel. It was like ACT UP newsreel.
If there are any on-duty, off-duty, closeted, undercover police officers or federal agents in this room, you're required by certain laws that we know about to identify yourself at this time.
Don't do it! They never do it!
They never do it. Why? You're such a friendly group of people. I don't understand.
ACT UP was not one monolithic institution. It was a group of people who met every Monday night, and many of them were parts of smaller groups or cells or affinity groups within the larger group, and those affinity groups to some extent had, if not a separate life, a life outside the group. So it was much more molecular in structure.
We're the Awning Leapers. We're from ACT UP New York.
Hi, we're Wave 3 of ACT UP New York.
Hi, I'm James Shapiro, and I'm representing AIDA, Anger into Direct Action.
Everything about ACT UP was so brilliant organizationally, and it was brilliant because it was organic and it came out of necessity. And the affinity groups were pure necessity because ACT UP always wanted the freshness of irreverence. And irreverence can't come from consensus. And the affinity groups allowed for small groups of like-minded people to do whatever they wanted.
We're the Isolations from ACT UP Chicago.
We're with the Power Tools, and we're the group that shut down the New York Stock Exchange.
I'm Maxine again,
and I'm Linda.
And I'm from the Coast Affinity Group in New York.
So the idea of affinity groups was from the civil rights movement and also from the women's movement. You know, and the whole idea was that when you get trained to do civil disobedience, that you have to you break down the group into smaller groups, so that you sort of know everybody and everybody knows you, and you can support each other in a very specific kind of way.
We're the Invisible Women. We're from ACT UP New York.
I want to announce the first ever in the history of the AIDS activist movement, an affinity group for people dedicated to alternative and holistic treatments. We're called the Non-Toxics.
We are Los Locas Radicales and WAR, which is... WAR is wipe out AIDS and racism.
Affinity groups within ACT UP, if they worked, when they worked, for their lifetime, could be almost like these close-knit communities. But if an affinity group did something that put your bodies on the line, risked arrest, and sometimes actually did arrest, I'll speak at least for myself, my fear level was always very high, and I don't know if I could have done it without a group of people within which I felt close to. I'd seen in similar situations, lots, trusted, liked, and several of them loved. Some of them are people I was as close to as any people I've been to in my life.
We really began to talk about civil disobedience as a safe tactic for making a stronger statement and as a way of getting media attention. For civil disobedience, I think it's absolutely critical to do an affinity group structure for safety.
Again, locking arms. It's painful, and that force of resistance that you're providing can be used against you.
We really talked about trying to get everybody in the group trained for civil disobedience because you don't always know when it's going to happen or when you're going to want to do it.
K-Rock, of all places, the rock and roll station, has been plugging this demo all day long. The DJ called up and said, you know, can you just do like 2 minutes of hyping the demo at 2 o'clock? And remember, you're speaking to teenagers. Then he dedicated all of these Radical 60s songs to us. All day long, he kept talking about this demo and how you had to be here. Every New Yorker had to be there because he would say, New York, this is your problem.
Housing, not shelters. AIDS housing now. 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 Housing, not shelters. AIDS housing now.
People with AIDS live in the streets in New York City, and that's the policy of this administration. It's not a mistake. It's the way Koch has it set up, and we're here to say if they're going to live in the streets, we're going to block the streets too.
To protest Ed Koch's lack of spending on health care and AIDS in general. I had a friend who was just in Bellevue, Health and Hospitals Corporation, which Koch is directly responsible for. They don't have pillowcases. The hallways are dirty. I had another friend who just went in an emergency room. 24 hours. Not only him as a person with AIDS was waiting for a bed upstairs, but everyone, old people regardless. There's no rooms upstairs.
There's a lot of good news for a lot of people. People live longer. We can provide some people better care. In the beginning, no one got anything. The tragedy of it all is the epidemic continues to increase. Our resources do not increase, so people are dying. The really sad part about that is the people who die sooner and die with the least services are basically poor people in New York, and there's no one to fight for them, certainly not in City Hall.
Pretty scared, but being HIV positive, I don't have much choice in that.
I just love all these people, and I think that what we're doing is really right. And
no one has made any outreach.
I mean, listen to this and look at all the people. It's just really wonderful, and it's worth putting myself on the line for.
There is no accurate diagnosis. There are incentives in the city hospitals not to diagnose people with AIDS, and therefore people don't get treated. We are angry at the way this city has handled this crisis, and we demand that Ed Koch exert leadership and declare a state of emergency.
City Hall was the first time we decided to make the wave system, where you get arrested in waves, right? So like one group would maybe have a demonstration on that corner over there, and another one on the next corner, so you'd get arrested like that. The first group would get arrested, and then they called it waves because the next one would come like a wave to get arrested.
Those are the options. Go in the street now with CD9 or wait. 1. He says go. 2 now. He says now. 3. 3. Tom. Go now, Tom says. 4. 4 says now. 5 says now. 6. Now, if you won't want to go, say no. Don't feel frightened about it. 7. Says now. 8. 9 now. 13 now. 15, we're... while I was being semi-dragged away and said, but you're willing to get arrested for this? I was like, sure, come on, people are dying. There's no AIDS care in this city. I'll let them drag me across the street a few times. I don't care.
When we get arrested, we usually are aiming to get a meeting set up or deliver a set of demands. Eventually, after a couple of those, we did manage to have a meeting with them in City Hall. It's rewarding personally to have participated in that and to actually see things change or see issues being covered by the press gives you a sense of accomplishment, even though if you didn't actually bring about a housing unit for a PWA at the time, but you know that incrementally you're making some change.
I think it's drawn a very big crowd, bigger than we might have expected, and the most impressive thing is the new faces here, people who are not core ACT UP members. Members of the general public, I think, for the first time have been drawn to a demonstration like this because they recognize that things are not working right in this city, because there's been good coverage of the gridlock in hospitals, because they know that this is affecting their daily lives, whether they are HIV infected or not. And so they see that it's in their personal interest to get angry about this.
A diverse, nonpartisan group of individuals united in anger and committed to direct action to be quiet and end the insurrection.
ACT UP was my whole life. I went to meetings every single night. All my social events were ACT UP. All the people that I met in ACT UP, some I'm still friends with now, they became like my family.
Every job I got came from people in ACT UP, temp jobs. It was always temp jobs. During an ACT UP meeting, we're like, oh, we need some jobs. If anyone has a job, and then I got a call the next day.
I loved going to meetings. I was hooked on meetings. I never missed a meeting unless I was out of town.
For a lot of people, they were spending 10, 20 hours a week on stuff.
I mean, I was already living ACT UP. I was one of those insane people that was, had a full-time job and then was doing the ACT UP work until whatever hour at night.
ACT UP completely changed my life. Every relationship I had, there was my life before ACT UP and my life after ACT UP.
I was desperately wanting to be part of the world in a meaningful way, and here it was. And that's all I really did was ACT UP. I worked, I had jobs, I found a way to support myself, but it was all to get me to those Monday night meetings.
It was where I really got a sense of community. Throughout all that misery and all the crap, to actually find a community of people. It was, without a doubt, hands down, probably one of the greatest periods of my life.
Went in there, 5 of them chained themselves on a balcony and lowered a sign that said, "Sell welcome." These drug companies are profiteering on our lives, and that we cannot accept that anymore.
At that point, any administration in New York had to pay attention to the Catholic Church. It was almost as if everyone was a Catholic. This is not about people's right to practice their religion individually. This is about an institution that is spending millions of dollars a year to make sure that we do not live.
Cardinal O'Connor made an amazing series of statements
which can be summarized in 4 words, and this is not an exaggeration. Let them get AIDS.
The history of hate phone calls or death threats to ACT UP, we've gotten very, very few. It's usually like once every 6 months. But just to show you how daring this action is, our death threats are now running a couple a day.
I'm going to advocate getting into that church to offend parishioners, to offend the church.
There was a lot of concern as to whether or not it was really appropriate for us to do a demonstration at the church.
What I care about is making sure that David Dinkins doesn't listen to him, the city council doesn't listen to him, the Board of Education doesn't listen to him, and that he loses his political power in the city. And therefore, I don't think it's so crucial to confront him inside or the parishioners.
The Catholic Church gives sermons, collects money for the right to life. The church is a political institution.
Again, this is a very good opportunity for us to get out our printed information in the form of a false St. Patrick's Cathedral program. We do not challenge anybody's right to worship, so that's right up front. But then it goes on basically with our complaints. It's our fact sheet. The strongest thing we can do is something in silence, a die-in, a mass-in die-in that occurs 2 minutes after he opens up his mouth, up along the central nave and the portion right before the altar. Okay, we want to deflect attention away from the pulpit.
We must put out the message that we are the ones who are fighting for people's lives, and they are the murderers.
Stop the church! Stop the church! Stop the church! Stop the church! Streets! Take the 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 streets!
Safe sex is good morality. Cardinal O'Connor, face reality.
Safe sex is good morality.
Cardinal O'Connor, face reality.
Act up! Fight back! Fight AIDS! Act up! Fight back! Fight AIDS! Act up! Fight back! Fight AIDS!
Find out why we're here today. Safe sex information and a free condom.
There were always overlaps between the women's health movement in the late 80s and ACT UP because the principles are the same. It's about respect of your body, control of your body, health of your body, rights of your body.
My name's Charlie Myron, and I'm with WHAM, Women's Health Action and Mobilization. And we've co-sponsored this demonstration today with ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, because the Cardinal has put out a joint attack on women's rights and reproductive freedom and people with AIDS simultaneously. I mean, AIDS is the #1 killer of women in New York City, so if O'Connor goes out and says, don't use condom, considering the population that really listens to him, that's going to be the death of thousands of women.
Our kids, our adolescents are dying of AIDS as well, and we're trying to teach them safe sex, and O'Connor is saying, no, you can't do that.
This is Jesus Christ. I'm in front of St. Patrick's Cathedral on Sunday. We're here reporting on a major AIDS activist and abortion rights activist demonstration, which will be taking place here all morning. Inside, Cardinal O'Connor is busy spreading his lies and rumors about the position of lesbians and gays. We're here to say, we want to go to heaven too.
On that day, the root of Jesse, set up as a signal to all the nations, the Gentiles shall seek out, for his dwelling shall be glorious. This is the word of the Lord.
He then told them what was going to happen, that did happen, and out they went into this period of waiting.
and what you saw.
I'm Sarah Schulman. I was sitting in a pew and I watched the die-in, which I think was pretty effective. But when people from ACT UP started standing on pews and screaming, it really alienated the people who were praying. I saw people get very angry and upset. I think they felt really violated by that. Although the die-in, I think, was much more effective because it was silent.
I thought it was one of the best things ACT UP ever did. And there are loads of people who think it was terrible, okay? And they blame it for 100 things that it didn't, from my point of view, was not to be blamed for. The number of people inside was not what got the church scared. What got the church scared was that there were 7,000 people outside. That was the biggest ever picket demonstration we had. And the Catholic Church in New York had never had that many people to say publicly, you are killing people. Your policies, not your religion, your policies and your money, okay, are killing people.
We said for years in ACT UP that our job was not to be liked, that we were not doing what we were doing to get the public to like us. We were doing what we were doing to accomplish something about particular issues. And I think we did that enormously successfully. And we weren't liked, but we forced people to pay attention and forced change, I think, much quicker than it would have happened.
The Catholic Church has never in New York rebounded from that action. Never. No matter what. Even though they're very strong still. They have never had the same profile.
I remember going to the meeting after it. Everybody was terrified after it because it had been in the paper and everybody had, every editorial page in town had dumped on us and people were scared. And I remember saying, are you crazy? Are you crazy? They're afraid of us now. That's the best thing that could ever have happened to us. And it was true.
Grand Fury really drove the graphics of ACT UP. Even when they no longer did the graphics, they set the standard.
So we sort of became the official, unofficial, like, art arm of ACT UP.
Our mission was to get out, like, in as raw and rambunctious a way as we could, certain messages that we felt like were not getting out into the mainstream world, which is why we adopted, like, the mainstream look of advertising.
The posters ACT UP put out those first few years were just astounding. They were great agitprop, but they were also good art. This was not trivial stuff because a lot of people came to ACT UP because of these posters that we pasted everywhere, just everywhere those first few years. Every street corner had an ACT UP poster, sometimes, 3 and 4 ACT UP posters, and you could, even compare the art styles and things like that.
And now, if you look at a demonstration, I was looking at some peace demonstrations the other day, all of those typefaces are influenced by ACT UP. They all look like ACT UP signs.
Those individuals who are inside are going to be kissing, I guess, and sitting and kissing.
ACT UP was very sexy, and I think that's one reason people wanted to be in on it. The loudness of it, the theatricality, its lack of compromise, I think, was very sexy at a time when people were just hovering around a certain kind of, I think we're doing okay in the gay community, I think they like us. ACT UP said, well, so what? Why do we even need to be liked? We need certain things as human beings. And the reason we're not getting those things is because they don't like us that much.
AIDS actually has been a very powerful weapon against a lot of sexual freedom. It was a given that sexual freedom had to be defended in the face of a deadly epidemic. And the whole atmosphere of what ACT UP was a bubbling cauldron of tremendous political energy and ideas and action and flirting and cruising.
ACT UP was an erotic place. The Monday meetings were, it was in some ways almost the first place that you could celebrate sexuality again after AIDS hit.
Men were having sex with men, women were having sex with women, men and women were having sex with each other.
Well, I mean, I was 21 and surrounded by all these men who were so attractive to me, and that it was always part of it, I think, for many of us who were involved in ACT UP who were in our early 20s. It was this sexy place to go. We didn't have to always go to clubs or bars. We could go to ACT UP meeting, do something important, but also get this kind of Jones off the whole thing.
There was this whole idea the epidemic stops with me. The government's not going to take care of us. We have to take care of ourselves.
At that time, safe sex was the easiest thing in the world because it was just what you did. We were all in this together. It was just, I never had to think about it. It was so simple.
It was a combination of serious politics and joyful living that was so great in ACT UP.
It was fun, we will go out and do a demonstration and then we'll go out party or, any kind of thing you could think of will happen. And there was no judgment.
That combination is what you need in order to continue. You need, some life.
This state is a disaster area. Where's the leadership?
Okay, what else? Governor, the programs are completely ineffectual. I'm a social worker in New York City. There are people dying with AIDS on the streets of New York City.
I went in with AIDS-related pneumonia to a hospital in New York City. I was not able to get a hospital room. I was stuck in a corridor. I was lucky enough that I was able to leave. The next day, a friend of mine whose name is Sal went into that same hospital, was there for 9 days, and is now dead. And that entire 9 days he spent in a corridor of a hospital. He was never given a hospital room because this body behind us refuses to spend the money that's needed so that people who need health care can have it.
All across this country, no damn health care act.
People were looking at the ACTG, the AIDS Clinical Trials Group, and wanted to be part of the decision-making process around clinical trials. Who were in the studies? That we wanted that information, and that's what they didn't want to give us. That they felt was proprietary. How many women are in the studies? How many people of color are in the studies? And we really wanted to look at demographics.
There was a whole lot of push about just sort of practical how trials should be done. That really makes them more accessible to people with HIV. That happened between '89 and '92. It didn't all happen because of ACT UP, but ACT UP played a huge part in making that happen. This is the start of something that should have happened 10 years ago at the start of the AIDS epidemic. And it's something that really did start in 1988 when we took over the FDA. And after 7 years in which the FDA had released one drug, in the last 2 years they've released 4 drugs, and they've released 4 other drugs on expanded access. We have to break down the cult of the expert in every area of this society. The people with AIDS are the experts in this disease.
We want them to stop the secret meetings and to open meetings to people with AIDS and their advocates and to all people who are interested, including the press. And we want people from the affected communities to have voting power and speaking power because they're not going to get anywhere against this until they're actively dealing with the people who are most affected by the disease.
This is a story of a coalition. My interpretation, my rendition of ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, the NIH on its final hour. Can you say it with me? Storm the NIH. Let's go. Storm the NIH. This is war. For the sick. For the poor. Act up. Fight back. Fight AIDS.
Basically what we're doing is blasting the horns every 12 minutes to remind people that statistically right now, every 12 minutes someone in America is dying from AIDS.
We're talking about the fact that they don't allow people of color into their trials. We're talking about the fact that they don't care about women, they don't care about children, and that their trials are inefficient, dysfunctional, and we're here to let them know that we're not going to tolerate it anymore.
NIH, mira, Latinos tienen SIDA. NIH, mira, Latinos tienen SIDA. With AIDS under attack, what do we do? Act up, fight back. People of color under attack, what do we do? Act up, fight back. Drug trials for women. Drug trials for women. Drug trials for women. Drug trials for women. Drug trials for women.
I'm here to tell you more trials should be available for me and the rest of the poor. I have a home now, but about 10 months ago, I was still homeless. Many people who are here today are still homeless right now. One thing I can tell you about the NIH, they don't have any homeless people in their trials, and they don't have trials for people who are drug users.
NIH scientists need to work with activists. NIH scientists need to work with activists. NIH scientists need to work with activists.
It's time for an end to secrecy in science. It's a time to an end for conflicts of interest. It's time to an end to medical apartheid. It's time to an end to research driven by the search for a Nobel Prize, prestigious journal articles, and trips to scientific conferences in Palm Springs.
It has to happen over and over and over again. The actual scientists have got to come out of the buildings and confront us and realize that we are live human beings and we're fighting for our lives, and we've got to shake them loose, literally, from their ivory towers.
The relationship changed with NIH. I was very involved in the development of the community constituency group at the AIDS Clinical Trial Group, where after them not giving us information about clinical trials in the beginning, they were now saying, we want you in this process, and now let's figure out how we're going to do that. And that really meant being members of the groups of people that designed and implemented the clinical trials program. I was the first person with AIDS to sit on the executive committee of the ACTG. The first time a patient had ever sat in that kind of capacity ever before.
Before I go on, I want to talk to you about a little chant that I want you to do. The first part you know all about, it's act up, fight back, fight AIDS, check it out. The next part to complete the craze is add 3 beats between each phrase. It's act up, we demand health care for all, fight back. Get on the ball, fight AIDS. Hysteria and this New York AIDS disaster area.
ACT UP has gone through a lot of change and growth over the last few years, and one of the most exciting things is that we've gotten beyond the pretty narrow set of issues that ACT UP was originally founded to deal with, which was, as the slogan went at that time, getting drugs into bodies.
There's a reason why the quote-unquote drugs into bodies position is inadequate, because it simply doesn't account for the historical oppression of either gay people or people of color or women.
It's not just about drugs into bodies, it's about the people whose bodies, these drugs could eventually get into. So the entire spectrum of issues that ACT UP deals with has just mushroomed.
The healthcare system in this country has not worked equally for everyone, and that has been illuminated for me personally as a white gay man in dramatic ways, because women have always known this. I think it's one of the reasons why lesbians in particular, but women in general, have taken such an active role in this struggle.
Part of the journey being within ACT UP is also understanding that, right, but you come from privilege. These were people who were brought up, myself included. You get sick, you get taken care of, your life is not written off, and so imagine the shock when you turn around and you discover, what do you mean, me? There's this entitlement, a sense of entitlement that was actually proved to be very useful for the group, because it really sparked, there's nothing that gets anybody more angered than to discover suddenly their entitlement is taken away.
What I saw was the opportunity in ACT UP for social change. What I saw was that we might be able to, using AIDS as sort of a nexus of all these problems that happen in society, that we could actually address some of this stuff and work toward changing society that way.
I mean, when you're out there fighting for your lives and you're already queer and you're HIV positive, you think you're at the margin of marginality, but you're not. ACT UP was just beginning to realize that it wasn't at the edge of the margin. In fact, it was like kind of the privileged within that margin. These were difficult times in ACT UP, where we constantly had to relook at ourselves and look at our privilege and look at our own demographics.
One of the important things that the ACT UP Women's Caucus brought to the world and to the AIDS activism movement is just the very idea that women get AIDS too.
Hey, Michael.
One on either side of the front of the aircraft, one on either side of the rear of the aircraft, and two extra clear marks over the waist.
Oh my God! Get ready! People ascending to heaven. Act up! Fight back! Fight AIDS! Act up! Fight back! Fight AIDS! Redefine AIDS! CDC is killing women! 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 Redefine AIDS!
The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, definition of AIDS was linchpin in many ways.
The definition had been developed through an observational, systematized collection of diseases that were being seen in gay men alone.
An AIDS diagnosis requires the presence of HIV and then 2 or 3 of these other illnesses, since it's a syndrome. Here is these women that were HIV positive, but were not getting sick in the same ways that gay men were. They had other illnesses present with their HIV.
If you got an AIDS case definition, you were entitled to benefits, Social Security disability benefits. And without that AIDS case definition, you didn't have that. And it could literally mean the difference between life and death.
Count the women, get to work! Count the women, get to work! Count the women, get to work! Count the women, get to work!
So we came up with this plan. Don't let up on them. Let them be hit from the healthcare establishment, litigation, activists, scientists. Beat them until they yield. So campaign-style organizing.
It started out by us doing this Women in AIDS teach-in, which I loved about ACT UP, which people don't even talk about, the teach-ins, which were just educating ourselves about issues. And then like creating booklets. And the handbook that we created for the Women in AIDS teach-in went all around the world.
CDC, can't you see? Lesbians get HIV! CDC, can't you see? Lesbians get HIV! Women die! CDC, tell us why! do nothing. We die, they 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 do nothing.
Simultaneous to that, Terry McGovern at the HIV Law Center was pursuing litigation with Social Security Administration to get them to change how they were, what definition they were using.
And you can't sue the CDC. You know, they don't give away the money. They do these definitional things in terms of benefits programs. So I had to figure out a legal strategy to get at the benefits programs for using the CDC definition, which wasn't a fair definition. This was hugely important to get that definition expanded for women and also for low-income people. I mean, the original AIDS definition was not looking at the concept of converging epidemics. So it wasn't just women. It was, you know, lots and lots of poor people if you had to pick a denominator. I filed the class action and then got on a bus to go to Washington, and we together planned this big women's demonstration in front of Health and Human Services.
How many women have to die? Or say they qualify? How many women have to die? Or you say we qualify? How many women have to die? Or you say they qualify?
I'm Phyllis Sharp from New York. I'm also a plaintiff in this lawsuit against the Social Security, charging them with discrimination against women. I applied April 1989. I couldn't work. I constantly have urinary tract infections, yeast, chronic fatigue, and I was denied.
My name is Iris De La Cruz. I'm a 37-year-old woman with AIDS. There are no treatments. Every week I hear stories of women going into the hospital or dying from things that could have been prevented or at least treated. One of the reasons why women remain untreated is because they don't have Medicaid and they have no access to health care. I don't want to die. I don't want to die of PID. I don't want to die of AIDS.
We charge you with genocide!
And so the second CDC action was the most pouring rain day I've ever seen in my life. It was like not to be believed. And people stayed out there. Women with HIV stayed out there. I mean, it was just really powerful.
I have a file at the county hospital. It's 4 inches thick. I'm not sick yet. I have 15 medications, but I'm not sick yet. I have $35,000 in medical bills, and I'm not sick yet.
28 years old and I'm dying, and nobody gives a shit. Get off your asses and do some research. We're dying. Murder by omission. Change the definition. Murder by omission. Change the definition. Let go of her. Let go of her. Let go of her. Change the definition.
Murder by omission. This is it.
Murder by omission. Change the definition. Murder by omission. Change the definition. We were AIDS under attack. What do we do? I can't fight back. We were AIDS under attack. What do we do? I can't fight back.
Watch it, pal.
Hey, shut up. Hands off.
Come on. You. Hey!
We've got to this point in the demo where they start thinking, what can we do to these people to get even?
No violence! Stop, take your pants! They do nothing! No. They do nothing!
Change the definition! Act out! Fight back! Fight AIDS! Act out! Fight back! Fight AIDS! Act out!
We eventually had 300 different groups across the United States of every kind that you can imagine who signed on to the CDC definition campaign. And we would constantly be sending them information about everything that was going on.
CDC's trying to cop a police simulating concern for AIDS and HIV. We don't compromise, accept lies or trades. Women act up, fight back, fight AIDS.
Clearly what happened was that the CDC understood that it needed to expand that definition, and they were looking for some way out of this thing. So it expanded January 1st. They added cervical cancer, bacterial pneumonia, pulmonary tuberculosis, and anybody under 200 T cells.
People came together to work on that everybody said would not work together. And that's what was amazing about it. My affinity group had 24 people in it. There were only 7 of us that were women, okay? And several of the men had HIV. Several of them are dead at this point, okay? They spent like 4 years working on a campaign about changing the CDC definition for women and for poor people and for drug users. And that is like something that nobody ever says about ACT UP. They always talk about gay white men, gay white men, gay white men, selfish gay white men. And that was not, we got tremendous support in ACT UP for that work.
In January of '91, the ACT UP called a day of desperation. And the idea was to ACT UP asked affinity groups to mobilize all over the city all day long, and then end with a big shutdown of Grand Central Station.
The night before, the plan was to invade various evening news broadcasts live. I was involved in planning the CBS action because I had worked at CBS. First of all, they took my ID card, which I still had, and they copied it and put their own faces on and made their own ID cards. And I diagrammed the floor plan of the building on West 57th Street, the broadcast center for CBS, where the evening news is done.
We figured we only get a few seconds before they go off the air. So we decided that the first word has to be AIDS. So if nothing else is heard, they hear the words AIDS. We decided AIDS is news, fight AIDS, not Arabs.
We couldn't see a monitor, but we could hear the announcer saying, this is the evening news with Dan Rather, and then we just ran on.
This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. We're going to take a break for a commercial just now. We'll break for a commercial. Thank you very much.
And then it was like a fascinating media moment because it became a news story on stations all across the country as long as they weren't CBS affiliates.
I talked to someone who saw it broadcast on CNN and when they were in Jerusalem doing war coverage.
It was about magnifying the voice of a small number of people holding a minority opinion who do not have access to the means of production. We were stealing access to the means of production to make ourselves heard.
I'm from a community of homeless people. We're homeless people with HIV, with AIDS, and we don't want to just die. We're not going to be silent because silent equals death.
It was unbelievable, the amount of people that were in Grand Central, it was completely filled with us.
When we went to the FDA in 1988, one of the slogans I came up with was, healthcare is a human right. And I thought the more that we could press that as a moral cause, it was something that we could ally ourselves with many people outside of the gay world and the AIDS world, but always with the idea that universal health care was the goal.
As time went on, the consciousness of people on the floor and in the group changed, which was a wonderful thing to see, because it was not just finding those drugs if they were out there, it was also ensuring that there was access.
We were always focused on the fact that people of color, people who were in lower economic brackets, died faster after diagnosis, if they were diagnosed at all.
I do think it was this HIV negative, HIV positive issue, and it's, I mean, I feel like a lot of people came to ACT UP out of like the fear of God that they were going to die, and a lot of people came looking for treatment information.
You had people who probably would have never been activists, except that they got some bad news from the doctor and they were getting sick and they realized they needed to do something. And they might have otherwise continued on as Wall Street, brokers or whatever it was they were doing. And this changed everything. And their interest tended to be pretty focused on what is the treatment I need that's going to keep me alive and not let this virus kill me.
I felt that ACT UP was a healthcare movement. I don't know if I had faith or not faith that there would be a cure in my lifetime. I pretty much thought I was going to die from this thing. And I felt like, that it was pretty clear that ACT UP and the AIDS movement was a catalyst for the growing healthcare movement at that time.
I do think that the split had to do with people who were interested in immediately saving their own lives versus those who had a bigger vision of bigger issues or were interested in saving other people's lives. And to some extent a misunderstanding between those two groups. I thought it was quite tragic. I thought it was a complete misunderstanding to think that these were opposite and exclusive points of view.
At that time, there was mostly an enormous amount of despair. Here, ACT UP had had all these incredible successes so quickly. But we'd won all these battles, but the war, we were all still dying. There really was no hope. It was horrible, and there was this kind of panic that set in, this mixture of panic and despair.
So many people sort of spun off. It wasn't a debate that engaged people. It was the kind of debate that set people back into their own corners. The movement just began to eat itself up from the inside, and that was really, it was painful to watch. And I think it was also, it came at a time when energy was low because so many deaths had occurred.
Last April, my lover Warren died, and I was going to send his ashes to George Bush with a protest letter. And I talked with friends from New York who, I felt like that was going to be real private, like no one would know about it, and they suggested bringing it to the floor of ACT UP. They said they would personally support it, so they said, when you're in New York, why don't you bring it to the group?
A lot of us agreed that we wanted to show the truth, of the unvarnished truth. Don't pretty this up in any way. What has come out of this epidemic? It's ashes, it's bone chips.
Gloria! Michael! 150,000 dead! Where was George? 150,000 dead! Where was George? Right now! Fight it! Fight it! Act up! I love you, Mike!
My name is Eric Sawyer, and I scattered the ashes of Larry Kurt,
Larry Kert was 60 years old. He was the original Tony in West Side Story on Broadway in 1957. Larry was to have his last professional performance at the White House. He was invited to a party to sing with Carol Lawrence. They were going to sing Somewhere There's a Place for Us. And he planned to come out as a person with AIDS. And when the White House administration found out he was going to do that, they conveniently lost his music just before he was to go on.
This was my friend, Kevin Michael Kick. He was 28 years old, and he died on Halloween, 1991. I only knew him for about 2.5 years, and I was his home care nurse. But he stole my heart. I'm here on behalf of my father, Alan Danzig, who died when he was 57 years old. I really needed this to come to closure with his death. He died 4.5 years ago.
I came to scatter the ashes of my lover, Michael Tad Hippler, who is better known to many of you, I think, as Mike Hippler, who wrote a column for 10 years in the Bay Area Reporter, San Francisco's lesbian and gay newspaper. Truth to tell, I had scattered all of his ashes that I had, but I was sitting at breakfast with his sister, and I told her about this demonstration, and her eyes lit up, and she said, "Hey, do you want some ashes?" So I love you, Mike, and I know you would have wanted to be where you now are.
My name is Greg Ross. I live in San Jose, California. I just lost a friend of mine in Las Vegas. Unfortunately, he was Mormon, so he was not cremated, so I could not scatter his ashes here. And the main reason I'm here is to scatter my own ashes. I'm going to die of AIDS in probably 2 years, and that is why I'm here. And the one thing I want to say is it's God bless people like ACT UP that have allowed me to live longer than I would have otherwise. You guys have the courage, the strength, the commitment, and the love, and the compassion to help make my life longer. Until I die, I will join your force and help and hope to do others the same.
I mean, 90, 91, 92, 93 was just, for me, they were dreadful in terms of people dying. I mean, people who had survived a while, people were just dying, AZT wasn't working. It was a very tough time. And so it was very much about literally bringing the bodies of our dead to, where we thought the blame lied, or, I mean, part of, a significant portion of the blame lied, and making that quantifiable. It wasn't just about nice things. It was, here's a dead body. This was someone who we loved, who we valued.
We started to talk about David Ronerovich's book, Close to the Knives, and the passage in there that, says every time somebody dies of AIDS, I think their lover, their friends should drive with their bodies 100 miles an hour down to the White House and throw their body over the White House fence. And we started thinking, we goddamn right, that sounds just about right to us.
I worry that friends will slowly become professional pallbearers, waiting for each death of their lovers, friends, and neighbors, and polishing their funeral speeches, perfecting their rituals of death, rather than the relatively simple ritual of life, such as screaming in the streets. I worry because of the urgency of the situation, because of seeing death coming in from the edge of abstraction, where those with the luxury of time have cast it. I imagine what it would be like if friends had a demonstration each time a lover or a friend or a stranger died of AIDS. I imagine what it would be like if each time a lover, friend, or a stranger died of this disease, their friends, lovers, or neighbors would take the dead body and drive it with a car 100 miles an hour to Washington, D.C., and blast through the gates of the White House and come to a screeching halt before the entrance and dump their lifeless form on the front steps.
You told we could do this once before. You said, let's just talk. That maybe ordinary citizens will see what our government is doing? Is that what you're afraid of? That people are maybe going to see exactly what this government does? Yeah, we have a dead body here. We have a corpse.
I'd like to read something that Mark wrote and wants us to do today. Bury me furiously. I think about all the passion and precious time I've spent fighting this government's indifference towards me and all people with AIDS. And I realize that a lot of people out there, gay, lesbian, and straight, still do not believe the AIDS crisis is a political crisis. I have decided that when I die, I want my fellow AIDS activists to execute my wishes for my political funeral. I want to show the reality of my death, to display my body in public. We are not just spiraling statistics. We are people who have lives, who have purpose, who have lovers, friends, and families. And we are dying of a disease maintained by a degree of criminal neglect so enormous that it amounts to genocide.
Several months before his death, Mark said, "I want my funeral to be fierce and defiant." In obedience to his wishes, we brought his body to the doorstep of the man whose callous disregard, whose inhumanity killed him as surely as did the disease. We've covered his body with the list of demands Mark himself helped make. The demands for simple, inexpensive measures that have gone unheeded.
When the living can no longer speak, the dead may speak for them. Let the whole earth hear us now. We beg, we pray, we demand that this epidemic end. Not just so we may live, but so that Mark's soul may rest in peace at last. This fight is not over till all of us are safe. Act up, fight back, fight AIDS.
Fight back, fight AIDS! Act up! Fight back, fight AIDS!
What AIDS revealed was not the problem of the virus. What AIDS revealed was the problems of our society. It was this fissure through which everything, all the ways in which our society isn't working became really clear.
ACT UP, I think, also really saved a lot of our lives psychologically. And that's really what ACT UP was for on an individual level.
I firmly believe that being in ACT UP in those years was one of the things that enabled me to stay working as an active professional within the HIV field.
For those of us who were directly involved in ACT UP and lived, I think it definitely lives in us on an everyday moment. But I do see it as a remarkable model of what can be done in the best of ways when people draw on their strengths and their different strengths and do things they don't know they can do.
The great feat of ACT UP was the ability to bring all these people together and have all of these people sort of imbue these people with knowledge, imbue these people, empower them, if you want to use that word, and then these folks went out to do other work.
Beyond the people, there were the ideas and the philosophy, the politics, the culture that came out of ACT UP that is still with us and has had an enormous impact on this country.
I think that ACT UP was able to pretty much change the nature of how AIDS was represented in U.S. culture. There was an enormous shift
in this sort of hideous misrepresentation of people with AIDS to a more true, a more thoughtful kind of representation. We saw something really shift.
And I look at the fact that I'm HIV positive today, and I wouldn't be alive today if I didn't get arrested 20 years ago. That's absolutely true. That if we didn't do what we did 20 years ago, I wouldn't be here. The medicines that I take to stay alive, I would not have.
Now, even though not everyone in ACT UP was gay or lesbian, I think that one of the greatest accomplishments was that it was a very powerful movement where the majority of the people in it was gay men and lesbians, and that my guess is that that led to changing social attitudes to them in the 90s. And I hope that that's lasting.
If you can tap into a forbidden emotion, you can unleash enormous amounts of power. It tapped into this rage that people didn't know they had, didn't know they could have.
The best result of ACT UP was to put it in your face and make every person see the devastation of this disease.
Wall Street trades on people with AIDS! Wall Street trades on people with AIDS!
It gave a young gay kid, a lot of young gay kids, something to fight for. It was our World War II.
Wall Street trades on people with AIDS!
Direct action came back to life during the period of ACT UP, just as historically had happened before and will happen again.
ACT UP!